Hello and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that intro to my FLAMEBLAST Demon Form guide. This build is insane when it comes to clearing T18 maps and has absolutely no issues completing all of the endgame content currently offered to us in Path of Exile 2. And it's an absolute blast to play. I've chaptered out the video for you so you can go to the section that best suits your needs. But if you want to fully understand how this build functions, I highly recommend you watch start to finish. Alright, the first thing we should talk about is our Ascendancy. Obviously, we are still using Demon Form for the extra cast speed, ramping spell damage, and increase to our spell levels. But what makes this entire build possible is our newfound ability to take and sustain Pyromantic Pact. Pyromantic Pact swaps out our mana bar for an infernal flame bar. Think of it as a reversed mana bar. Every time you spend enough mana to fill your infernal flame, you will deal damage to yourself, possibly igniting you, and every time it fills, it resets back down to 0. So as you blast mana, you will constantly be damaging yourself with fire damage. This is very difficult to sustain, but I will go over exactly how we manage to do that right after we finish going over the rest of our Ascendancy. Our third Ascendancy choice will be Grinning Immolation, because now that we don't have to invest heavily into mana regeneration, we can spend our points on the passive tree, improving our critical hit chance and damage. And finally, our fourth Ascendancy choice will be Altered Flesh, for a very nice additional layer of defense. Okay, now let's go over how we sustain our Pyromantic Pact. The first thing we should talk about is since Pyromantic Pact and Grinning Immolation are dealing fire damage and igniting us, we need to increase our maximum fire resistance to 90%. We achieve this by getting ruby jewels with not only life regeneration on them, but also a plus 2% to max fire res. We will also want to take these passives on the left side of the tree to reduce the effectiveness of ignite on us. However, we will still be dealing damage to ourselves so consistently that our energy shield will never get a chance to recharge. So to fix that, we will take Zealot's Oath in the passive tree. This way, while we are constantly damaging our energy shield, we will also be consistently regenerating our energy shield through our life regeneration. Now, both of these solutions are great, but if we spam our Flame Blast, we still cannot sustain the damage our energy shield is taking. So in order to fix this issue, we will be taking Eternal Youth on the passive tree. This turns our life flask into an energy shield flask instead. Now, in order to get full value out of this notable, you will need to get 3 things. A utility belt, so our flask will give us a burst of energy shield back. A proper life flask with these modifiers: percent increased life recovered, removes percent of life recovered from mana when used, percent chance to gain a charge when you kill an enemy, then use glass blower baubles to get the quality of the flask to 20%. The last thing we will do to increase the effectiveness of our flask is socket the Herbalism support gem, but more on that later in the gem section. Now we have a new problem, because our life flask doesn't work anymore. So how are we going to sustain our Demon Flame stacks? Well, to fix that, we're going to be taking a few different damage taken recoup as life nodes in the passive tree. This way, when we damage ourselves with Pyromantic Pact, that will stack up some massive life regeneration that we can use to push our Demon Form to 400 or even more stacks. And there you go. Now you can sustain your Pyromantic Pact as long as you have flask charges. Next, let's talk about the gear required to make this build work. For the most part, the gear of this build is exactly the same as the gear used for the Hexblast Demon Form guide I did a while back. So if you were following that build, this will be a very easy transition for you. We are still using the same 2 uniques, and they are required for this build to function properly: the Ghost Writhe Tattered Robes and 2 Ming's Heart rings. You'll want to use Flesh Catalyst from Breach on these rings to reduce your maximum life even more. We use these uniques because they lower our maximum life pool, making it much easier to sustain being in our demon form. Once you can afford it, You'll want to take the risk of corrupting these uniques yourself with Vol Orbs, or just buy corrupted versions of them that reduce your life more than the uncorrupted versions. We will be using rare items for the rest of our gear set. These items, other than a couple small changes and the fact that we no longer need mana, are going to be basically identical to our Hexblast Demon Form set. It is still very important to avoid getting any maximum life or increased strength on any of our gear, because we want to lower our maximum life and get as close to 200 as we can. So don't get any gear with either of those stats. All right, what modifiers are we looking for? Life regeneration, everywhere we can get it. Enough resistances to cap out all of our elemental resistances at 75%. Even though our max fire res is going to be 90%, we'll be picking up 20% from our passive tree. So don't worry, no need to focus it any more than the others. And finally, energy shield. Energy shield is even more important in this version of the build, and with anything less than 5,000, it'll probably start to feel a little less comfy. Now let's go through each piece of gear individually so you know exactly what you're looking for. On our helmet, we want life regen, resistances, energy shield, critical hit chance, if you can fit it and still be good on your resistances, and then also intelligence, but only if you don't need the resistances and you are having issues getting the 205 intelligence requirement for a level 20 skill gem. On the amulet, we want life regen, plus 50 spirit, plus cast speed, energy shield, resistances, but only if you absolutely need them here. Otherwise, use one of the following modifiers instead. Plus level the spell skills, damage taken recouped as life. Finally, intelligence. Again, this can be helpful if you are having problems reaching the 205 intelligence requirement for a level 20 skill gem. You'll want to use flesh catalysts on your amulet to increase your life regen or damage taken recoup as life regeneration even more. Also, on your amulet, you will still want to anoint Resilient Soul. Use the distilled delirium currency you farm from either delirium or buy off the currency exchange. It takes 2 distilled envies and 1 distilled guilt. For our gloves, this is the best piece to go absolutely nuts on resistances, so I recommend aiming for 3 resistance mods here. Secondly, you will want to get as much energy shield as you can. For the belt, make sure you get a utility belt to help sustain your energy shield, and then go for these modifiers: life regen, resistances, increased flask life recovery rate. And finally, on the boots, we want a minimum of 30% movement speed to make flame blasting feel comfy. Life regen, resistances, energy shield, and this is the last place you could potentially get intelligence if you still need some to help reach that 205 requirement to use a level 20 skill gem. Alright, now let's move on to a full breakdown of our passive tree. In our new passive tree setup, we are looking for a few main things: the required notables in jewel sockets to make Pyromantic Pact work, energy shield, cast speed, area of effect, critical chance and damage, elemental damage bonuses, and freeze buildup. Now let's go through everything I chose to take. If you are planning on playing this build, I have a max roll guide in the description, and you can use that to either follow along or refer back to later on if it's easier for you. Alright, let us take a look at our passive tree. From the start, we're going to grab the max energy shield. We'll come over for some cast speed right here. Grab all 3 of those. Come back up, more energy shields. Here, we'll branch off. We'll grab these max energy shield nodes right here. We will also grab these critical hit chance and critical damage nodes right here. And then back from where we branched, we're going to take these damage taken recoup as life nodes. This is very important. Keep coming up. More crit stuff right here. Sudden escalation, critical hit chance. It's great. Then right here, this is where we branch. We'll go this way first. Right here, we're going to come down for some more maximum energy shield. This is lots of energy shields from this little wheel right here. We'll keep coming down. There's another little branch right here. We're going to come up here for some elemental damage, a bunch of cast speed, some critical strike right here, and then also there's some more cast speed up top here. Overzealous is amazing. The increased cast speed is great. The increased mana cost, we don't even notice. And then back down from where we branched at. Keep coming down. This wheel right here is absolutely massive. This is all increased area of effect. This is huge. Keep coming down. Right here, we have Zealot's Oath. This is important for our Pyromantic Pact to work. We'll keep coming down for the reduced effect of Ignite on you. We'll come back up to where we branched at, right here. And if we keep going up this way, we come over and we take these nodes. This is max energy shield and +1 to all max ally res. This is awesome. And we're also going to grab these damage taken recoup as life nodes right here. Now back over. Take some critical hit chance right here. Max energy shield right here. This is awesome. If you're running low on intelligence, you could potentially take ingenuity right here. You would have to take a point out from somewhere else, but this can help you get 205. Keep going. And right here, we're going to take, these are both some really nice freeze buildup nodes. Heavy Frost is going to help your damage a ton as well with your comets. And this will increase the damage of everything you're doing against frozen enemies, which is awesome. Then we'll keep going down. This node right here, Icebreaker, this is what's going to help you not get frozen by stuff. This is super important. Take this, and then also with your anti-stun charm, you're going to be like immune to hard crowd control. This is great. And then right here is Eternal Youth. This is important for our Pyromantic Pact to work. And also some triggered spell stuff right here for a little bit more energy and also increased damage. So there we go. That is that's the passive tree. And next we're gonna look at the skill gems. Let's take a look at Demon Form first. The only gem we use here is Second Wind. This allows us to have a second charge of our Demon Form. If you ever lose your form and don't have a charge left to get back into it, you can just teleport back to base and get both charges back. Next, let's look at Solar Orb. This ability is primarily only used versus bosses, but also particularly useful in spicy moments, where you really don't want to walk into whatever it is going on, like a bunch of ground effects. We support it with Fire Exposure to reduce ignited enemies' fire resistance, Strip Away to increase the amount of fire resistance we are reducing, Controlled Destruction to deal more damage with hits and ailments. We don't really care if this ability is critting or not, so the downside to this gem doesn't really exist. And finally, Persistence to increase the duration that the Solar Orb will be out on the field. Flame Blast. This is our new main ability to spam as we clear maps and nuke bosses. We are supporting it with mobility, so that using Flame Blast feels comfy and doesn't slow down our movement speed too much. Arcane Tempo for some much needed cast speed. Fire Mastery for more damage. Inevitable Critical to increase our crit chance, which will result in more damage. And Magnified Effect. This way our AoE is insanely large. Magnified Effect should be in the last slot so that it can be easily grabbed and swapped out, because depending on the type of content we are doing, we will change this gem. For map clearing, I recommend using Magnified Effect. However, when you go to fight pinnacle bosses, you should put Magnified Effect onto Blasphemy and use Fire Penetration here for your Flame Blast. And now for our cast on Ignite setup. I want to quickly point out that the amount of energy this gem gains is based on the magnitude of the ignites you are inflicting. That's why you won't start to see insane amounts of comets flying out of the sky until you have around 50 or so Demon Flame stacks. Comet, this ability has an incredibly high base damage and crit chance. This is our primary source of bossing damage. Spell Echo causes our comet to fire twice every time it gets triggered. Considered casting, 4 more damage, Concentrated Effect, 4 more damage, and Spell Cascade. So that while we are clearing maps, every time our comet is triggered, we will get multiple comets, not just one. And then Spell Echo will echo this effect as well. It's important to put this in the last slot because just like Magnified Effect, we will be swapping this gem out when we go to clear pinnacle bosses. The gem that will be taking its place is super critical for a massive increase in critical damage. Now this next one might be a little weird, but this is a holder gem. We're using Detonate Dead, but we aren't actually using Detonate Dead. Think of this as extra inventory space for our bossing gems. Its only purpose here is to hold our 2 gem swaps so that they are close by and we never have to actually put them into our inventory and take up valuable space. As a reminder, I keep 2 gems in here. Fire Penetration to swap with Magnified Effect on my FLAMEBLAST, and Super Critical to swap with Spell Cascade on my Cast on Ignite Comet setup. Next is Blasphemy. We are only using Blasphemy in our Pinnacle bossing setup. So when you are mapping, this Spirit Gem will be turned off and you will turn Grim Feast on. It is being supported with Flammability, which reduces the boss's fire resistance, and Magnified Effect. When fighting Pinnacle bosses, we take Magnified Effect out of our FLAMEBLAST and place it here inside of Blasphemy. Alright, next is Grim Feast. We are only using Grim Feast while mapping. So when you go to fight Pinnacle bosses, you will turn Grim Feast off and turn Blasphemy on. We're supporting it with Cannibalism for extra life recovered on kill. This is crazy when you are clearing a super dense breach and your stacks are peaking up over 400. It really helps you to sustain your form for a crazy amount of time. Second, Herbalism. This really helps with the Energy Shield Flask setup and also boosts the instant recovery provided to you from your utility belt. Arctic Armor. This is the only Spirit Gem we leave on permanently. However, when we go to fight Pinnacle bosses, I recommend moving both of the support gems from this ability over to Eye of Winter. And they are Glaciation for more freeze buildup if you do ever get melee attacked, and Deep Freeze for increased freeze duration. And now for Eye of Winter. You will only ever use this ability on bosses when you are preparing for a Pinnacle boss encounter. Again, I recommend moving both supports from Arctic Armor over to this ability. So you would have Unleash. So we throw 3 orbs at a time on our first toss. This way we have a much higher probability of stacking up the crit chance buff to max, as well as landing a critical hit and applying our cold exposure, which comes from the cold exposure support. Like I just mentioned, it will apply cold exposure, reducing the enemy's cold resistance when we land a crit. And then Glaciation, moved here from Arctic Armor, gives us more freeze buildup, and Deep Freeze, also moved here from Arctic Armor, which will give us a longer freeze duration. And finally, Orb of Storms. You'll use this ability primarily during boss encounters, but also at the start of certain league mechanics like Breach or Ritual. And also, it can be useful in killing rares if you run into one and you don't have enough Demon Flame stacks yet to just downright one-shot it. We're supporting it with Conduction for more chance to shock, Overcharge for increased magnitude of shock, Execrate, again, for higher chance to shock, and Stormfire, so that our shocks will never expire because everything we are fighting will always be ignited. Now, if all the gem swaps confused or annoyed you, trust me, it's not that bad, and it's only necessary when you go to fight Pinnacle bosses. For map bosses, it doesn't matter at all. I'll have both setups on the Max Roll written guide linked in the description, and also feel free to stop by my streams anytime to ask questions. Now, for a few tips on how to play this build effectively. My biggest piece of advice is that you have to have your life bar above your character. There is just no way you can move your eyes down to check your energy shield as often as you should be. So go to Settings, Interface, and scroll down to the Gameplay section where you can enable Show Mini Life Bar above you. My next tip is don't overuse your Solar Orb. It's a very helpful tool, but you want to be using FLAMEBLAST primarily on yourself so that you are close to whatever it is you are killing. That way, whenever it dies, you can instantly start grabbing the souls for your Grim Feast and charging another FLAMEBLAST before the enemies that were outside your previous one reach you. If you have any questions about the build, please ask away in the comments and I'll get to as many of them as I can. You can also stop by my stream or join our new community Discord server and find me, as well as many other Path of Exile enjoyers to chat with there. As you can probably imagine, these build guide videos take a lot of time and effort to put together. So if you enjoyed the video or found it helpful in any way, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the thumbs up and like the video. If you have any ideas for future content you would like to see from me concerning Path of Exile 2, let me know in the comments. And subscribe so you don't miss out on my next video. Peace!